Welcome to our GLP-1 webinar, which is featuring a new natural solution for boosting GLP-1. Our science team, consisting of Dr. Starry McKean, Dr. Hannah Shrestha, and Philippa Thompson, will be sharing key insights about the mechanisms of how Feiolix is a natural GLP-1 inducer and how it acts to promote metabolic health. At the end, we will be having a panel discussion during which we will be addressing key questions around Feiolix and its unique properties that boost GLP-1.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Dr. Starry McKean, and I will be joined by two of my colleagues later in this webinar. We're discussing a new natural solution for boosting GLP-1, and we'll be presenting just a quick preview of scientific results later in the webinar. So let's dive right in. So GLP-1 is gaining loads of popularity. At this point, about 50% of American adults have expressed interest in GLP-1 agonist drugs, and this corresponds with about the 41% of Americans who are classified as obese and the over 11% who are unfortunately diabetic. So this accounts for about 96 million Americans who qualify for weight loss prescriptions. But what is GLP-1? It doesn't actually stand for gaining loads of popularity. It stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. GLP-1 is an incretin, which is a portmanteau of ingestion and secretion. So GLP-1 is secreted when food is ingested, and it acts on nearly every system in the body, as you can see in this graphic to the right. It acts on the brain, on the heart, the pancreas, in adipose tissue, in the gut, in muscle, in the stomach, in the liver. Nearly every major organ has receptors for GLP-1. And so GLP-1 influences metabolism by stimulating insulin secretion and by inhibiting glucagon release, which is partially why it's called glucagon-like peptide, because it acts like glucagon and inhibits that release. And it also increases glucose uptake and utilization. GLP-1 reduces appetite by inhibiting gastric emptying, and it also acts on the hypothalamus in the brain, which is the region of the brain which regulates appetite in the central nervous system. So some of our best data as to the efficacy of increasing GLP-1 and what it does for both metabolism and appetite and weight control, as well as diabetic metrics, come from the massive amount of clinical research that has been done on GLP-1 agonists. So GLP-1 agonist is a pharmaceutical drug that synthetically increases the amount of GLP-1 that's present in the system. So these two charts to the right are meta-analyses that have been compiled looking at the change in HbA1c, which is a metric of diabetes, on the top, and change in weight on the bottom. So there are 8 studies that are summarized here. These are very large studies. They have anywhere between 295 and nearly 1,000 participants. Most of these participants are diabetic with BMIs greater than 30, and these are quite long interventions, so 24 to 30 weeks of intervention. And the key takeaways that you can see here are there are significant reductions in HbA1c, and there are significant reductions in weight when GLP-1 is increased in the system. So there's a lot of current space for medications in the appetite, metabolism, weight management area. There are currently 6 medications that are approved by the FDA. So there's intestinal lipase inhibitors, which reduce fat absorption. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors decrease appetite. Dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors help decrease appetite as well. GLP-1 agonists obviously decrease appetite. They also increase fullness. And melanocortin-4 receptor agonists decrease appetite. But the number of side effects on these drugs are significant. So between 20 and 44% of consumers report nausea, between 9 and 13% report vomiting, between 8 and 17% report diarrhea, and between 6 and 9% report constipation. So there are a number of jokes about with these kinds of side effects. Of course, people lose weight on these drugs. When it comes to tolerability and weight regain after quitting these drugs, the data is a little bit more concerning. So after 1 year, about 66% of the weight that had been lost is generally regained. In another study, in participants that had lost 15% of their weight, they regained at least 11% of that weight back. So there is still persistent weight loss, but it's certainly not what you would see in that first year. And most of that weight regain is due to increased appetite and decreased fullness. And even more importantly is thinking about what are the long-term effects of taking these drugs in the short term, and what's the long-term effects of taking these drugs in the long term to maintain that weight loss. And these are currently unknown because these drugs are very, very new. And then there's also supplements. So there's currently 12 supplements that have claims supporting their efficacy. There's lots of amylase inhibitors, and there's also anti-inflammatory polyphenols. And speaking of supplements, that's what we're here to talk about today. So Feiolix is made from whole New Zealand feijoas, and it contains high levels of anti-inflammatory polyphenols. It contains blood glucose lowering and satiating abscisic acid, and it also includes satiating dietary fiber. So these three main bioactive compounds in feijoas all actually contribute to GLP-1 secretion as well. So polyphenols are notoriously anti-inflammatory. They also stimulate GLP-1 secretion. Xyloglucans are a type of polysaccharide present in the cell walls. They're a type of fiber. They increase satiety, as all fiber does, and they also have a prebiotic effect, which stimulates GLP-1 from the large intestine. Abscisic acid also increases GLP-1 secretion from the pancreas and increases GLP-1 secretion from the small intestine. So let's talk about abscisic acid, because this is the bioactive compound that we're really excited about in feijoas. So abscisic acid is actually a universal signaling hormone. It's present in both plants and humans. In plants, it's associated with the separation of fruit from stem. In humans, however, it's co-secreted at low levels with insulin from the pancreas. And feijoas actually contain the highest recorded concentration of abscisic acid of any fruit. So this co-secretion in humans is actually what makes it really, really important. Because we natively produce it ourselves, it means that we have native receptors for abscisic acid in our body. So this native receptor is called the Linkel-2 receptor, and there are very, very dense Linkel-2 receptors on the pancreas, obviously. And this is why abscisic acid binding to Linkel-2 on the pancreas leads to insulin secretion. It also leads to GLP-1 secretion, and we know that GLP-1 increases satiety. There are also Linkel-2 receptors in the brain, and when abscisic acid binds to Linkel-2 in the brain, it reduces inflammation. It helps support thermogenesis, so that's that central nervous system control of homeostasis. It increases the sense of satiety in the brain, and it also reduces neuropathic pain that's perceived in the brain as well. There's also Linkel-2 receptors in adipose tissue. So when abscisic acid binds to Linkel-2 receptors in adipose cells, it decreases macrophage infiltration or inflammation in adipose tissue, and it improves that glucose tolerance in adipose tissue as well. And there's Linkel-2 receptors on muscle cells. So that increases glucose absorption and glucose utilization, and it increases thermogenesis in the muscles itself. So we know that abscisic acid improves glycemia and lipidemia. This was seen in a high glucose diet study done in mice. So 2 groups of mice were fed for 4 months. They were fed a high glucose diet, and then they were given either placebo or abscisic acid. And after 4 months of abscisic acid consumption, you could see that body weight, HbA1c, blood lipids, and oral glucose tolerance were all significantly decreased. In another study looking at a fig extract, which had about 42 micrograms of abscisic acid, we could see that there's glucose and insulin response improvements over time. So on the top, we're looking at change in plasma glucose. That was significantly improved in the abscisic acid group. And then in the insulin area under the curve, change in plasma insulin on the bottom graph, you can also see a significant improvement in the abscisic acid group. So just to be clear here, the quantity of abscisic acid present in feijoas and in our Feiolix powder is greater than the amount of abscisic acid present in the fig extract. So dietary fiber, these are the xyloglucans that we were previously talking about, cell wall xyloglucans. This is food for probiotic gut microbes. And these probiotic gut microbes produce propionate when fed xyloglucans. And propionate stimulates GLP-1 and PYY release. So PYY is another incretin. It's another peptide that also supports satiety through another mechanism. Propionate also is associated with decreased gene expression for fat synthesis. So this is just another mechanism by which Feiolix contributes to overall satiety and weight management. As far as bioactive polyphenols go, the main polyphenols in Feiolix are hydrolyzable tannins. There's alpha and beta pedunculogen is the primary one. That accounts for about 60% of total polyphenols. These are transformed by the gut microbiota into anti-inflammatory urolithins. Urolithins also support insulin secretion and GLP-1 secretion. There's also flavins. These are parenthocyanidins, which are condensed tannins, catechin and catechin B2, gallocatechin and epicatechin. These are very similar to what's found in green tea. These are also transformed by the microbiome. These are highly anti-inflammatory and also stimulate GLP-1. So just to summarize some of these mechanisms by which Feiolix supports physical satiety, sensation of physical satiety by way of GLP-1, we know that the abscisic acid in Feiolix targets both the pancreas and the L cells in the small intestine, and both of these secrete GLP-1. This GLP-1 targets receptors in the stomach, which slows gastric emptying, increasing that sensation of physical satiety. Along those lines, xyloglucans, as you can see down on the bottom right, serve as a prebiotic for the probiotic good bacteria. And these metabolize into villus that triggers the signaling that activates the intestinal L cells and releases GLP-1, again, targeting the stomach for that increased sensation of physical satiety. In a related but separate mechanism, Feiolix also decreases hunger. So again, let's talk about abscisic acid and xyloglucans. We know that abscisic acid targets the pancreas, intestinal L cells, releases GLP-1 and PYY, another incretin. And we know that the xyloglucans, as prebiotics, feed the probiotics and turns into the metabolites. That again triggers the GLP-1 and PYY. These cross the hematoencephalic barrier, the blood-brain barrier, and targets receptors in the brain, which induces a satiating effect that you experience in your brain as well. So we have a decrease of hunger sensed in our brain, and we also have that increase in physical satiety coming from our stomach. So to sum it up, Feiolix is scientifically supported and patented to reduce blood glucose, to reduce cholesterol and triglycerides, to prevent weight gain, and to reduce joint pain. So just really quickly, I'm going to go into the history of Feiolix. We won't go too far into the details here, but I will say that Feiolix is actually more than a decade in the making now. And some of these first studies on Feiolix were done in mice. Some scientists in South Korea did the initial work here, and they looked at a feijoa extract, and they looked at how the extract worked in a group of obese mice. They looked at how feijoa extract helped joint inflammation in arthritic mice, and they looked at how feijoa extract could help inflammation in very inflamed mice. All of that was substantial enough, along with a clinical trial that was done in humans, to file a patent, which we still hold. Additional work was done on mass specs. We were looking at composition. So some LCMS work was done to find to find phenolics in Feiolix. And some of those phenolics were isolated into an extract. They were used in some in vitro cell testing to figure out what pathways were actually targeted. So you can see down on the bottom, we know that feijoa fractions have an anti-inflammatory signaling effect via the TLR2 and TLR4 pathways, and that they also inhibit JAK2 and MAPK pathways. These are all published works here. And later work, we still stayed in mice. So we looked at a high-fat diet-induced metabolic syndrome mouse study. We did additional dosage studies in mice. We looked at reduction in dosage preclinical studies, and now we've moved into human studies. So I'm just going to go over the first results of the mouse studies that were done by our South Korean scientists, and then I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Dr. Hanna Shrestha, to talk about some of the subsequent studies that were done both in mice and in humans, bringing us up to date. So again, the conception of Feiolix was in these 3 mouse studies where we found that in leptin-deficient mice, which were obese due to that leptin deficiency, the mice fed a feijoa extract gained 24% less weight. In the mice that had arthritis, it was found that feijoa extract was as effective as methotrexate, the go-to pharmaceutical, at increasing running speed and foot pressure that the mice inhibited, and they decreased inflammatory cytokines in arthritic mice as well. And then in age-related inflamed mice, the feijoa extract reduced those age-related pro-inflammatory cytokines in elderly mice. So at this point, I'm going to hand off to Ahana, and she's going to go into some of the past studies, current studies, and future studies that we have done and will be doing on Feiolix.
Thank you, Starin, for such a wonderful presentation and taking us through the journey of Feiolix making. I'll be talking more about the studies that we have with Feiolix and also share some interesting outcome. So talking about the study, this was the first human clinical done in feijoa extract. So this was a placebo-controlled double-blinded study in which type 2 diabetic adults were given either feijoa extract or placebo for 12 weeks. And after 12 weeks intervention, we saw significant reduction in blood glucose in the feijoa extract group compared to placebo. As you can see, the graph in the left, the graph in the right shows HbA1c, which is also glycosylated hemoglobin, and it was significantly reduced in the feijoa extract group compared to placebo. So the highlight here is that HbA1c decreased more than 0.8%, which might sound like a small change, but reduction of 0.5% is already considered clinically significant. So being a natural supplement, feijoa extract result seems pretty convincing for reducing blood glucose and glycosylated hemoglobin. Further, other parameters of metabolic health like triglyceride, total cholesterol, and LDL cholesterol also showed significant reduction in feijoa extract group compared to the placebo. The HDL cholesterol, however, remained more or less similar throughout the intervention in both the groups. So from this study, it was pretty clear that feijoa extract works really well in supporting metabolic health and reducing metabolic health marker like glucose, triglyceride, total cholesterol, and LDL cholesterol. Energenics then further did some in vitro studies and also preclinical study in this feijoa extract, but we found that extract was quite expensive. And also at Energenics, we believe at whole fruit goodness. So we redeveloped this into whole fruit feijoa powder or Feiolix. So after that, we redid some testing if the powder that we redeveloped was as good as the extract. So this is the result from a mice study. So diabetic mice were given either the extract that would be equivalent to the high dose of the powder, and two different Feiolix powder doses of high dose of 2300 meg and also the mid dose of 1150. The result was quite surprising. So if you see the first graph in the left, the fasting blood glucose decreased 1 week earlier in the powder, as represented here by green and gray, compared to the extract that is represented here by black. If you see triglyceride, you see similar patterns. For cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, we see preventive measure, as in there was prevention of increase in these parameters as these mice were also getting disease in the powdered version. And for the HDL cholesterol, which remained more or less higher in the powder compared to the extract. So from this study, we learned that the powder that we redeveloped was better than the extract, and also lower dose or mid dose of 1150 was as good, if not better, than the high dose of the powder. So for this reason, we use this dose for another clinical, which I'll be talking to you shortly. But before going to the human study, I'll be first talking about the dosage study that we did in mice, for which all the mice were fed with high-fat diet for 8 weeks, which was then followed by 16 weeks of intervention of Feiolix from as low as 100 meg to as high as 2300 meg. So the objective here is to find the dose effect from the Feiolix and also to find the lowest efficacious dose of Feiolix. For this study, there were three different control. Non-diabetic control, these were the healthy mice. Metformin control, so these mice received metformin instead of Feiolix after they developed the disease. Metformin, as we all know, is a drug to reduce the blood glucose. And high-fat diet control, they were the ones that did not receive any treatment but were diseased mice. So the effective dose here would be if any of the dose performed as good as metformin or non-diabetic control, or they were significantly better than the high-fat diet control. So this is the result from the study, which so you can see the magnitude of change from 8 to 24 weeks. So from the disease development until the end of the intervention. So the highlight here is that the low dose of 300 meg was as good as metformin and non-diabetic control in reducing blood glucose, triglyceride, total cholesterol, and LDL cholesterol. The other interesting result here was that the high dose of 2300 meg prevented weight gain in these individuals, and this was even better than non-diabetic control and metformin control. And also the liver histology was performed at the end of the study, and this high dose of 2300 meg performed as good as metformin in preventing liver damage, which is commonly seen with high-fat diet intervention study. So here comes the first human clinical done in Feiolix powder, done in 1150 mg dose. The study was done in collaboration with University of Auckland and called as a Ferdinand study, a very interesting study design in which pre-diabetic individuals who were also overweight or obese were randomized to get either Feiolix or placebo for 6 months period. But the interesting thing is that there was 2 months of weight loss phase where all the participants were also given low energy diet or more or less liquid diet. This was then followed by 4 months of weight maintenance where participants were advised to have healthy diet, but there was no restriction in terms of diet. So the objective here is to see if Feiolix helped in the weight loss phase, but more importantly, if Feiolix help to prevent the rebound effect that is usually seen when person goes back to the normal diet. So the primary outcome here is fasting plasma glucose and body weight, but the study was a very comprehensive study, so lots of other parameters are also analyzed, including microbiome, body composition, lipid profile, HbA1c, also subgroup of population having oral glucose tolerance test, and also GLP-1. The study has just completed and is still in the data analysis phase, but I was very excited to share this preliminary result with you all, which showed marked reduction in systolic blood pressure in the Feiolix group and also improvement in glucose management. So as I already said, that very comprehensive study. So we are waiting for lots of other interesting outcomes. So stay tuned and just we will share the result as we go. Just keep in touch and stay tuned. So this is another study which was also done in collaboration with University of Auckland, but quite a different study design. So this is an acute study in which healthy participants are recruited, and the study is done to evaluate the acute response of Feiolix on postprandial metabolism, including thermogenesis, glucose and insulin response. So basically, participants come at the fasting stage and their blood sample is taken. Then they are fed either with plain yogurt or yogurt with Feiolix, and their blood sample is taken at different postprandial time points until 3 hours. So as being a crossover design study, the participant received the other treatment in their next visit, which was at least a week apart. So the good news here is that we have finished the recruitment for the study, and this is still in the data analysis phase. But yes, stay tuned. We'll share more result with you as we go. So this is the other study, which we call as a safety study done in uncontrolled diabetic individuals at multiple hospital sites in India. So this is done with high dose of Feiolix of 2300 meg and for 3 months. So the primary outcome here is also blood glucose and HbA1c, but we are also measuring lots of other safety parameters like kidney function test, liver function test, other metabolic markers like the lipid profile, blood pressure, and so on. So for this study, We do not have the placebo, but it will provide us information if there is any contraindication of drugs, as these participants were also having some drugs, and that's why we call it more of a safety study. The study is anticipated to be finished by end of this year. So stay tuned. While we're still waiting for the result from the clinical studies, we do have evidence from the preclinical study that 300 mg of Feiolix can help reduction of blood glucose, LDL cholesterol, and triglyceride for medium dose. We also have human evidence for a reduction of systolic blood pressure and also glucose management. For high dose, we have preclinical evidence of preventing weight gain and liver damage caused from the high fat diet. So all in all, Feiolix is a very good natural supplement that helps in the metabolic support. And we did look at what consumer actually are looking for or in a supplement. And globally, we found that most of the consumers are looking for health, long-term health benefits like avoiding diabetes, improving weight, uh, reducing cholesterol, blood pressure, and we believe that Feiolix can help support them receive these long-term health benefits. In addition to that, we believe Feiolix also has opportunity in menopause. So 45% of the women in the US said that their life is affected by menopausal symptoms, and more than 50% of the menopausal women that they are affected by the symptoms like sleep, hot flushes, joint pain, etc., which is also difficult to handle. So how can Feiolix help? So as already described earlier, that Feiolix has many bioactive. So there are two different key mechanisms how Feiolix can help in the menopausal symptoms. One from the abscisic acid, which is also a GLP-1 agonist that helps in overall metabolic support, and the other is estrobolome, which is kind of a key new concept here. So estrobolome is how the gut bacteria can help in the modulation of estrogen. So Feiolix has very good prebiotics like xylons and xyloglucone, which means that they help to support growth of good bacteria like bacteroids, and bacteroids bacteria can help in estrogen metabolism, its reuptake and circulation. So through different mechanism, we feel Feiolix can also help for the menopausal support. So for this, we did a short consumer study in perimenopausal and postmenopausal women just to look their feedback on Feiolix and how they felt. So just after 3 weeks, we saw the following results. So at baseline, these women reported quite severe or moderate symptoms, as you can see the graph in the left, which is more of the blue, and red, which means that they had either moderate or severe symptoms. But when you look at the graph at the right, just after 3 weeks, the color is more of a gray or green, and there is even absence of red color in most of the symptoms, which means that they had much milder symptoms, or many of the symptoms were even absent. So from this consumer study, we did figure out that the consumer reported much milder symptoms after Feiolix intakes with just 700 mg compared to baseline. And this is still ongoing with the feedback. So stay tuned and we'll share more with you. So on this note, I will hand over to Philippa, who will be talking more about the in vitro study that we are doing and also other format options for Feiolix. Thanks.
Thanks, Ahana. It was really lovely to hear from you. Hi, everyone. My name is Philippa Thompson. I am the product champion for Feiolix here at Energenics. I will be walking you through just a little bit more about another study we did on Feiolix, as well as some of the formulation opportunities we have for this really amazing product. So we had all this preclinical work. We thought, wow, this is really great. But the xyloglucans in Feiolix probably mean that it's probably a really good prebiotic. So why don't we test that and see what it looks like? So we ran an experiment, an in vitro one, where we just looked at the growth of a few particular probiotic strains on a nutrient broth when supplemented with our ingredients, BHE, Feiolix, Levox, and Actisin. And so we then just measured growth over time and measured the the optical density to measure that growth, just to see what we would get. And so the 11 strains that we decided to look at were 11 really common ones. You'll sort of note on this list, we've got things like Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus plantarans, Bifidobacterium animalis, say that 5 times fast. And when they have a whole variety of applications across the board for the probiotic industry in general. But we're just going to look at 3 in particular here for Feiolix, because they're the 3 that sort of relate to GLP and metabolic support. So what we're looking at here is Lactobacillus plantarum, which is positioned usually for weight management and metabolic support. And the graphs that you're looking here, I know they look kind of complicated, but all it simply is we're looking on the left-hand side of the y-axis at growth over control. So we obviously grew these probiotics by their own, which was our control, and then we grew them with our ingredient, which was, in this instance, Feiolix. And then we just compared at different time points as well as at different concentrations to see how well they grew. On your right-hand side, which is probably the easiest thing to look at for right now, is we took a time point at 16 hours for growth, because that's usually when your pre and probiotics hit your gut and where they do the most benefit. And so we looked at this for Feiolix at a strength of 0.5 mg per ml, and then looked at the growth over control. And as you can see here, we had up to 160% growth compared to just the control on its own, which shows that it was a really strong symbiotic match. And we think this is due to the abscisic acid as well as the dietary fibers, in particular the xyloglucans, providing the right food for this Lactobacillus plantarum. We also then here have Lactobacillus gasseri, which is another probiotic positioned for weight management and metabolic support. And we can see here that Feiolix experienced about 55% growth compared to the control. And then again here we have Lactobacillus rhamnosus HN001. And for those who formulate with probiotics, you've probably definitely heard of this one. It's making splashes at the moment in women's health for both immunity as well as mood and mental health and sort of pregnancy, that whole maternal space. And same thing here for Feiolix. When we've been thinking about it for menopause, we did see a 55% increase in growth. And just now, all 3 of these graphs pretty much tell us from this formulation standpoint is that Feiolix has the potential here to be a really fantastic prebiotic. The xyloglucans, which are those dietary fibers that we saw, are clearly giving these probiotic strains the food that they need in order to grow really well. Definitely a complementary effect. So if you're looking at sort of formulating with probiotics in any of these spaces, whether or not that's for weight management or for menopause, Feiolix not only provides that benefit from the abscisic acid and the GLP pathway, but also here with these dietary fibers as a prebiotic. And so finally, just to sort of summarize the symbiotic study we did, this is actually all 11 strains, which I won't go through entirely because it won't take too long. But if you're more interested in this research, or you'd like to sort of learn more about all 11 of these strains and what they're positioned for and how Feiolix could do that, please don't hesitate to ask, because we have a whole separate presentation on just this. But I guess the key takeaway here is, as you can see, Feiolix across the board of all 11 of these strains saw fantastic growth, anywhere from 50% all the way up to 300% growth when compared to just the control on its own. So just to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of manufacturing with Feiolix, I personally come from an MPD background, so if anyone's interested in the MPD side of things, this is for you. Feiolix has a really fantastic shelf life of 3 years. Storage is in a cool, dry place. What makes it rather unique is that, unlike some of our other ingredients, Feiolix is completely stable at high temperatures. So if you're thinking about formulating with something like a gummy or a lolly or a beverage, something that requires pasteurization or higher temperatures to work with, Feiolix will be safe. We have standardized the abscisic acid in it to 4 milligrams per 100 grams. So the abscisic acid is luckily quite stable at high temperatures, which is great. And you also know from our standardization that whatever you're going to choose to formulate with, you're always going to get that abscisic acid in it. We've also done sort of the bulk density and as well as Halsner ratios and CARS indexes. And what you can kind of see when you look down the bottom there at our particle size distribution is Feiolix sits really comfortably primarily in between that 200 to 400 micron range. So it's this perfect blend where it can flow really nicely, but it also still possesses the ability to be compressed and hold its form. So whether or not you're looking at making it chewable or putting it into a capsule, it's not going to be too fine that it just doesn't compress, but it's also going to still run through your machines and not clog them up, which is really good. Because it's a freeze-dried fruit powder, our moisture levels are really low. I think it sits at about 0.8% for loss on drying. Same with our water activity, which is about 1, I believe. And so the taste, the last and really the most interesting part, the taste, Feiolix tastes sort of like a pineapple and a guava if you put them together. If you've never had a guava, it just kind of tastes like a funky, very fruity pineapple, maybe. Very tropical flavors. It is a light green sort of tan powder, so it looks quite nice. And yeah, as a result, makes this really good for any sort of format options where you can taste or you're going to look at the powder. So whether or not that's powder in a pot, a sachet on the go, or even just a chewable tablet, it works really well for all of these things. So over the course of this, we've sort of talked a lot about GLP-1 and metabolism, and as well as menopause, and sort of the areas in which Feiolix is really well suited for from formulation standpoints. We just thought we'd run through a couple of the key areas here that you could consider. So obviously the primary one and the point why we're here is GLP-1, so that's your blood sugar and insulin regulation, as well as metabolism boosters are one good area. Another one is as a pre and probiotic combination, even then down with like things like vitamin D and joint health for menopause and addressing those issues. So this is one of my favorite slides that we have in this webinar because we get to just take a brief look at sort of some of the other ingredients that you could formulate with Feiolix and create sort of this synergistic formulation. And we sort of look at the key ones that we can see in the industry, which is things such as berberine, capsaicin, resveratrol, green tea with its epicatechins, chromium, ginseng. They're all really strong polyphenol-based ingredients that help to reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity. But quite often, they do this along different pathways than compared to Feiolix. One of these key differences is that Feiolix is a lipase inhibitor, which means it inhibits the conversion of dietary triglycerides into fatty acids and reduces the absorption of dietary fat. Where in comparison, most of these are amylase inhibitors, and what an amylase inhibitor is it inhibits carbohydrate breakdown. So it increases that feeling of satiety, but it doesn't actually prevent the fat like Feiolix can. Another key thing that is a bit of a difference is abscisic acid thermogenesis, the increase of energy expenditure, versus polyphenol thermogenesis is quite a bit different. ABA induces adipocyte remodeling in differentiated cells. Effectively, it changes white cells into more of these brown cells, where the polyphenol thermogenesis increases mitochondrial density to increase the thermogenesis. Another interesting point to make here, though, is we've seen in quite a few studies that combining ingredients can often increase the bioavailability of all of them. I think which is quite a fun fact, and why we actually promote, using our ingredient in combination with others. But at the end of the day, when we sort of look at the differences between the two, we see that it comes down to this sort of extract versus whole fruit conversation, where abscisic acid and Feiolix as a whole has so many different pathways and so many different effects. ABA on its own has the PPAR pathway, which no other herbs activates. It's also not an insulin mimetic, so something like berberine, which is quite common at the moment, actually mimics insulin in order to increase that glucogen absorption. However, Feiolix isn't, and that's good for people who have insulin sensitivity, because simply giving your body more insulin if you're a diabetic isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. Feiolix offers sort of this whole fruit, whole approach, which can be really good. But we definitely recommend all of these on the slide if you're interested in using these in formulations. When we just take a bit of a deeper dive very briefly into sort of the 3 different positioning areas that we have for Feiolix within this gut health and metabolic support. When we look at sort of synbiotics, you're interested in formulating with probiotics or improving gut health and metabolic support through your gut. You've got options such as a functional food bar where you could do oat fiber and Feiolix, or a pre-probiotic symbiotic capsule for weight management where you could use the strains we mentioned before, Lactobacillus plantarum or Lactobacillus thesserii with Feiolix. You could also even do a probiotic capsule for menopausal symptom relief, which is that Feiolix with that Lactobacillus rhamnosus HNO1. And you can know with certainty when you're making these that, we're going to see this growth from the symbiotics that you're hoping for. When we look at this weight management and GLP-1 and, how do we create the most beneficial effect amongst these ingredients, we really like the idea of either a chewable or a capsule, and then you could add things such as green tea extract because the catechins aid in that fat oxidation. Berberine, as we sort of mentioned before, how if you're not trying to market towards insulin sensitive people, then having that alternative pathway from berberine as an insulin mimetic could be a really, whammy of a product. You could also add in things such as Garcinia or chromium, which helps with increasing that satiety, or even as a weight control sachet, and you can add in the glucosamine for that extra fiber if you wanted to. If we're looking at menopause functional options, we could do things such as gummies or a smoothie mix or support capsules. And we could include ingredients such as like black cohosh, which has quite a few good studies for hot flashes as an alleviator. We could do the B vitamins if you're looking to improve energy levels. Pycnogenol, which is a pine bark extract out of France, has got some really interesting clinical studies on it for helping women with menopausal symptoms as a whole. Something like saffron or red clover extract. Just all of these complementary to produce this over totalitarian result that we're looking for. So when we look at the end here and we look at sort of, this marketing positioning, Feiolix is amazing because this GLP-1 space that we're sitting in with glucose regulation, insulin sensitivity, metabolic support, really crosses into numerous fields, whether or not that is your healthy aging, your blood glucose management, cholesterol balance, menopause, weight loss, symbiotic. What we're coming to this realization is all of the processes in your body are really well linked, and GLP-1 on its own produces so many effects, and ABA does even more than that again. So there's quite a few different market positionings that you can put here for Feiolix. Just briefly, some of the claims that you can make, and this is based primarily in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. Some of the claims are provides metabolic support, supports healthy blood glucose and triglycerides, supports the growth of probiotics, supports hormonal balance, supports weight management, and helps reduce systolic blood pressure. We are really pleased to say that Feiolix does have a patent that is currently accepted in the US, New Zealand, Australia, China, and Canada, and we are actively trying to increase those countries that we have the patent in. But we have a patent that is for our Feiolix in the treatment of type 2 diabetes and arthritis. And as you can see on the right there, some of the sort of the key takeaways is it is a method for preventing and reducing obesity. It can lower blood pressure, lowering your serum lipids, lowering your glucose, HbA1c is reduced, and helps with symptoms of diabetes. So we do have it accepted, and it is something that you can use, knowing that you have protection by using our patented ingredient, that, these are the claim summaries that you can make. Just some last little regulatory notes, because for the regulatory people out there, our food is non-GMO, it is dairy-free and gluten-free, comprehensive specifications, a very rigorous QA program that we have here. We do have the preclinical and clinical data to support this if you're looking for registration within your country. The product is heat stable. We do have the known mechanisms of action, and it is standardized to that abscisic acid. Well, and that's just about it. But thank you so much for taking the time to come and listen to our presentation. We are based down here in New Zealand, but please do not hesitate to contact us. We have a really fantastic team here, and we are dedicated to providing whatever support we can, whether or not that's in regulatory, quality, formulations. That would me, and any other way that we can help for you to get your product up and running. We're really passionate about this space, and we're really passionate about getting people the support that they need. And yeah, this is our Feiolix for metabolic health and support. I hope you feel like you understand a little bit more about GLP now. And we will now just finish off with a little bit of a panel discussion, answer any questions that you might have, and talk a little bit more.
We're now moving into the panel discussion, asking a few questions to the science team. First one, does Feiolix help with appetite regulation? What is the mechanism there?
Yes, absolutely. Feiolix does help with appetite regulation. Appetite is an extremely complex system in the body. It involves the digestive system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, among others. And we're really fortunate to have an ingredient in Feiolix that works across each of those mechanisms. So our hero bioactive here in Feiolix, as we've spoken about at length, is abscisic acid. And abscisic acid both increases GLP-1 production, both from the pancreas and from the small intestine. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it decreases inflammation in the central nervous system, in the hypothalamus, which then goes on to help regulate the leptin and ghrelin balance, which is a very strong motivator for appetite. And then we also have the fibers, and we have polyphenols. Do you want to talk about fibers?
Yeah, sure. So Feiolix does have fiber like zygones and zygoglucans, and that helps in promotion or supporting the growth of good bacteria like bacteroids, and that also ties back into the GLP-1 and Feiolix mechanism for hormone regulation. And fiber itself has a satiety effect, so fiber is definitely another component adding satiety effect.
And then we also sort of have the polyphenols, which also stimulate GLP-1 release, and in addition to they decrease inflammation, which contributes hugely to disruptive hunger signals that you get in your brain, and so they're able to, by reducing that, sort of decrease those.
Great. Are there any contraindications?
So Feiolix being just a fruit powder, we do not assume there would be any, but however, it has quite good effect for blood pressure control, blood glucose. So we would definitely recommend talk to a GP before, just to monitor your normal glucose and blood pressure and other parameters. And we are having actually another safety study in India where people with diabetic and also having lots of medication are going through the study. So we have more indication if there is any contraindication with drugs, especially. But so far, we have like halfway through, we haven't heard of any contraindication so far.
How does Feiolix compare with other natural products out in the market?
So appetite regulation and metabolic support is a crowded space in the market. There's a lot of products currently targeting that space because there's a lot of consumer demand for metabolic support right now. So we have minerals such as chromium, we have herbs, there's extracts, and each of those products tend to only work down one pathway. We're lucky two pathways. And again, with Feiolix, we've got multiple pathways that it functions throughout. So it happens to support appetite and metabolic support and weight management through a number of different pathways from a number of different angles.
And I guess that's sort of that whole fruit story that we have with Feiolix is really important because exactly that it contains all of the things we need. We also see in, say, the case of berberine where it is an insulin mimicker. So that's sort of how we improve its insulin sort of release, where in comparison to, say, Feiolix, where we see an improvement in insulin sensitivity through like the PPAR network, which is good for people who, say, have diabetes or have insulin sensitivity. You don't necessarily want to be giving them more insulin. You want to help rebuild those pathways and improve its capacity for them.
Okay, great. Yeah. What other research are we doing at Feiolix at the moment?
And so in terms of research, we're thinking about a lower dose of clinical study because we have seen very good results with the animal study. And in addition to that, we are also doing in vitro study to see how Feiolix would help in the growth of good bacteria like bacteroids to see its effect in that way. And further,
and we're also potentially thinking about a menopause clinical after our very exciting market acceptance. To see the results we got from that, we are in the process of looking into a human clinical to see how Feiolix really can help with menopausal symptoms. But
there's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of potential ways to position Feiolix in the market. So feel free to reach out with questions or suggestions about what market positionings you'd like us to explore through future studies and upcoming market acceptance testing, clinical studies, in vitro studies. We're happy to take considerations.
Absolutely, yes. And what claims can we make for Feiolix and at what dosage?
Yeah, that's quite interesting because we have just explained different dosage study and human clinical. So with as low as 300 mg, we've seen in preclinical study to support blood glucose maintenance, triglyceride, cholesterol, and with the mid dose of 1150, we do have a clinical evidence or clinical study still in the analysis phase, but we can definitely say it can help in management of blood pressure and also blood glucose. From the preclinical, we have like high dose of 2300, which showed improvement in weight reduction and also in liver damage. So different doses can have different claims, but definitely from our perspective, with the clinical evidence we have, the mid dose of 1150 balance out most of the things there.
We think it's definitely like the best sort of in between if you're looking at, bulk weight management and to manage your blood glucose. The 1150 is definitely a sweet spot.
All right.
Very sweet, thank you. Yeah. And finally, Shep, what other suggested delivery formats for Feiolix? Are there any? Or
My favorite question.
yeah.
My favorite question because it just to talk about how delicious Feiolix is. Definitely chewables would be my first and foremost go-to. Either that or say a powder or a sachet, something where you can really taste it because it tastes sort of somewhere between like a guava and a pineapple, as I mentioned, and it's really good for that, but it also has some really good manufacturing characteristics that make it suitable for just about anything, really, as a supplement.
And Feiolix is incredible in that we don't need to add any excipients to it. It's had fantastic flowability, and it's also incredibly heat tolerant. So it's perfect for baked goods, which is rare among supplements.
Thank you, team. Now we're heading to the live Q&A session.